My name is Jonathan Denton. I'm 51 years old. I've spent most of my adult life working in project management for a mid-size construction firm, the kind of job where no one claps for you but everything collapses if you're not there. I don't make a scene. I don't chase attention. I've always just tried to be steady for my family, especially birthdays, broken water heaters, kids who needed rides. If they called, I came. That's how I thought love worked. Until Christmas Eve, when I learnt that being loyal doesn't always mean you're safe. The evening looked like every other holiday gathering. Ham in the oven, kids playing on the floor, my father falling asleep in the armchair too early. My sister Evelyn always hosted her home, her rules. I arrived with a bottle of wine and a quiet heart, ready to enjoy the few hours we pretended things were okay. But something felt off that night. Evelyn was restless, tapping her ring against her glass like she was counting down to something, and then right after dessert, she stood up and cleared her throat like she was leading a board meeting. I felt the shift before she even spoke. "We've had some conversations," she said, looking around the table, "and we've made a decision. We voted, and Jonathan's no longer part of this family." Just like that. No lead-up. No warning. It didn't sound like a joke, and no one laughed. My brother-in-law looked down at his plate. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My dad fiddled with his hearing aid, pretending I think not to have heard her, but everyone else stayed quiet. That silence, that was the real betrayal, because silence means consent, and they all gave it. Evelyn kept going, said I was distant, too focused on my work, not involved enough in family matters. She accused me of being judgmental, unavailable, emotionally hard to access. I stood there, with my hands resting on the back of my chair, feeling like a stranger in the house I used to build blanket forts in. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask who voted or why, or what they thought I had done. I just nodded once, stepped back, and walked out the front door without putting my coat on. I drove for 2 hours, through side roads, past quiet neighborhoods, lit with soft white Christmas lights. I ended up at a gas station off the highway, sitting in the parking lot with the engine running, and that's where it really hit me. Not anger, not sadness, but the kind of clarity that only comes when someone finally tells you the truth you've been refusing to see. This wasn't sudden. This had been growing for years, and I had ignored it because I wanted to believe that if I kept showing up, they'd keep loving me. That night I made a vow, not to argue or explain, not to plead for re-entry into their circle, but to walk away quietly, with the same precision and calm they used to erase me. But I wouldn't stay gone. No, I'd use the same silence they handed me, and turn it into something they couldn't ignore. The first time I felt truly out of place with my family was 3 years before that Christmas. It was Evelyn's birthday, her 40th. I had taken time off work, bought her a gift that actually meant something, and showed up early to help set up. But when I got there, my name wasn't on the seating chart. Everyone else had place cards. Mine was scribbled in ballpoint on a napkin and shoved next to the kids' table. I laughed it off at the time, pretending not to notice the pattern that had already begun to form. I was always the afterthought. In those moments, I used to tell myself, they're just busy. They don't mean anything by it. But small things add up, like when they planned a surprise party for my mother and never told me, or when my father was in the hospital and no one called until the second day after he was already discharged. Evelyn once told me, with a smirk, that I lived in my own world. Maybe I did, but the truth is, they never made room for me in theirs. There were always these whispered conversations, shared glances when I walked into a room. When I'd ask how things were going, I'd get surface answers. Fine. Busy. You know how it is. I didn't push. I thought giving people space was a form of respect, but looking back, I realized they weren't creating space, they were building distance. And I was the only one pretending it wasn't happening. The emotional toll of that slow rejection is hard to explain. It's not one big betrayal, it's death by 1,000 cuts. I started avoiding holidays, not because I didn't love them, but because every visit chipped something away from me. I'd leave feeling smaller, invisible, like I had shown up to a play where I didn't have a script. I kept telling myself it was just me, that maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe I wasn't warm the way they needed me to be. But the truth is, I was always loyal, always there when it counted. When Evelyn's husband lost his job, I pulled strings to get him interviews. When my niece got sick, I took care of their dog for 2 weeks. When my parents needed help with the mortgage, I wired money without hesitation, and I never asked for thanks. But loyalty means nothing to people who've already decided you don't belong. That realization hit hardest in the weeks after Christmas. No one called, no one checked in. Not even a message to ask if I made it home. It was like I had been erased with a vote, clean and quiet. But in that silence, something inside me shifted. I stopped asking why they didn't love me the way I loved them. I started asking what I was going to do about it. And that's when the planning began. Not for revenge in the way most people think, but for restoration. Not for them, for me. I didn't start plotting anything dramatic. I'm not wired that way. But I do know how to build. It's what I've done my whole life, on paper, on job sites, in systems no one ever notices unless they fall apart. And that's where I found my leverage. You see, while they were busy excluding me from family dinners, I had quietly become the structural backbone of more things in their lives than they even realized. Financially, legally, and logistically. I never made noise about it, but I kept the receipts. Years ago, when my father nearly lost the house due to a poor refinancing deal, it was my signature that secured the better rate. When Evelyn and Todd opened their boutique store, I was the one who helped register the LLC, file the permits, even co-signed the lease because their credit wasn't strong enough. They needed a foundation, and I was it. But they assumed, wrongly, that a quiet man forgets the weight he carries. I hadn't forgotten a thing, and unlike them, I never moved without a plan. I started pulling documents. I reviewed agreements, lease contracts, shared accounts, and legal protections. Slowly, deliberately, no anger, no shaking hands, just clarity. There's a certain satisfaction in rediscovering your own power. Not power to harm, but power to choose who gets access to you. For too long I had treated loyalty like a chain. Now I was beginning to see it as a gate, and I held the key. I hired a lawyer, one who specialized in risk management and quiet exits. We spent weeks reviewing everything I was tied to. Then I began to unwind. Carefully, strategically, I revoked my financial guarantees. I transferred the LLC management. I sold off silent shares. I had invested in Evelyn's side business. I changed the beneficiary on my will and removed the emergency contact that once bore her name. Every step I took was a clean cut. No confrontation, no warning. What shocked me most was how little noise it made at first. They didn't even notice. That's the thing about people who believe you're powerless. They rarely pay attention when you walk away. But I wasn't just walking away. I was resetting the balance, quietly reclaiming everything they had taken for granted. And for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. Not petty satisfaction, but the calm that comes from standing up without raising your voice. I didn't tell anyone. Not friends, not colleagues, not even the lawyer beyond what was necessary. This wasn't for show. It wasn't revenge for a viral clip. It was the quiet act of a man who finally understood that you don't have to burn bridges, just close the gates and let them wander on their own. It took about 2 months before the silence started to echo back to them. Evelyn was the first to feel it. Her boutique had a problem with a supplier contract, one that I had originally negotiated and managed. She reached out by email, asking if I could take a quick look. I read the message 3 times, then closed it without replying. She followed up with a voicemail, her tone sharper, more desperate than I'd ever heard from her. She still hadn't noticed the changes to the LLC documents, but the cracks were beginning. Then came a call from my father, or rather from his accountant. Apparently a tax discrepancy had emerged tied to the refinancing paperwork I had once secured for them. They needed a clarification only I could provide, but I had already had my name removed from everything. Quietly, legally, permanently. I referred the accountant to my lawyer, who simply confirmed, "Mr. Denton is no longer involved." The shock must have landed hard. I never heard from them directly. Just silence again, but this time not the kind they controlled. What they didn't realize was how many threads I had held in place. I had supported the family, not with grand gestures, but with the kind of invisible maintenance no one notices until it stops. School application references for my nephew. A grant recommendation for Evelyn's friend. I had written them all, signed them all, pulled strings, opened doors. I was the scaffolding, but now the structure was shifting without me. Evelyn finally cracked one morning. She showed up at my office unannounced, something she hadn't done in years. I didn't let her in. I spoke through the glass door, polite but unmoved. "You said I wasn't part of the family. I'm just respecting that decision." She looked stunned, like she didn't expect the consequence to be real, like her words on Christmas Eve had expired with the leftovers. But I wasn't bitter. I was just done pretending. What I learned in those weeks was that silence, when intentional, is louder than any speech. It wasn't about revenge. It was about presence. They had voted me out. I accepted it. But now, they were discovering what that absence actually felt like when it was real, not symbolic. And I wasn't cruel about it. I simply gave them what they asked for. My distance, my removal, my detachment. I just did it with precision. Behind the scenes, I could see the unraveling. Friends of theirs started reaching out to me privately, asking why I wasn't around. Some didn't know what had happened, others did, and were quietly ashamed. I didn't air anything out. I didn't retaliate. I didn't post. I just kept moving forward. Because when you've been cut off by those you loved most, healing isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you never needed their approval in the first place. The final fracture came on a Monday afternoon. Subtle, like most endings are. Evelyn's store had been operating under the illusion of stability for months, but without the business relationships I had once nurtured behind the scenes, things started falling apart. Her inventory was delayed. Her landlord began pushing back on late fees. A contract she assumed would renew didn't, because I had quietly sold my stake to a competitor who had no interest in her boutique's survival. And then suddenly her polished facade began to crack. I heard about it through someone we both knew, a mutual friend from college who had stayed in touch over the years. "Evelyn's panicking," she said over coffee. "She's talking about closing the shop." I nodded, not offering anything. Because there was nothing to offer. I hadn't sabotaged her. I had simply stepped away from holding up the corners of her empire. She built it thinking it was hers alone, but I had been the hidden scaffolding, and when I walked away, the whole thing started to tilt. My parents, too, began to feel the weight. My father's health was faltering, and with the financial safeguards I had once arranged now gone, they were faced with decisions they weren't prepared to make. Medical costs, legal paperwork, estate planning. My number, once listed as the emergency contact, no longer rang through. My mother tried calling me once, her voice hesitant, almost unfamiliar. "We might have made a mistake," she whispered. I listened. Then I thanked her for calling, and I hung up. That phone call could have reopened the door, but it didn't, because I had learned something they hadn't. Closure isn't always reconciliation. Sometimes closure is when the wound stops hurting, even when the scar remains. I didn't need their apology. I didn't even want it. I wanted peace, and I had found it by letting them experience the vacuum they created when they cut me off. The hardest part wasn't watching them stumble. It was resisting the urge to rescue them. For years that had been my reflex, to fix, to support, to stabilize. But I had changed. I had grown. I realized that dignity sometimes means staying seated while the people who once towered over you begin to understand your worth, not because you shouted it, but because you removed it. And the silence left behind became its own kind of mirror. I wasn't angry. I was free. Free from the loop of giving to people who saw me as disposable. Free from the illusion that family is unconditional no matter how it treats you. And free from the version of myself who once begged to be seen. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate their losses. I simply walked forward with steadiness, with purpose, with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had survived what they thought would break me. It's been almost a year since that Christmas Eve. People still ask if I ever reconciled with my family. The answer is no. Not because I'm bitter, but because I've learned that not every story ends with a reunion. Some end in silence. And sometimes that silence is the most honest ending of all. I haven't set foot in Evelyn's house since that night. I didn't go back for birthdays or barbecues. I didn't send cards or gifts. I chose something different. I chose peace. I moved to a new neighborhood. Smaller, quieter. I planted a garden, took up hiking, started cooking meals I used to eat alone in restaurants. And I built new connections. Not grand ones, not fast ones, just real ones. People who saw me, not as the quiet backbone of some legacy I didn't ask to carry, but as a person worthy of attention without conditions. I found my rhythm again, slowly, deliberately, without looking over my shoulder. Evelyn sent a letter once, handwritten. No apology, just questions. "Why didn't you tell us how much you did for us?" she wrote. "Why didn't you say anything?" I never wrote back. Because the truth is, I did tell them. I just didn't use words. I told them through every favor, every act of service, every time I showed up even when they didn't. They just didn't hear it. And by the time they were ready to listen, I was already gone. I didn't need a family reunion. What I needed was restoration of my identity, my worth, my quiet strength. And I got that, not by forcing them to understand me, but by finally understanding myself. I wasn't cut off. I was set free. They thought they were rejecting me, but all they did was release me from the role I had outgrown long ago. The dutiful son, the fixer, the one who never asked for anything in return. That man doesn't live here anymore. These days, I don't speak much about the past. Not because it hurts, but because I've built a present that doesn't require constant explanation. I've learned that healing doesn't mean they'll come around. It means you no longer wait for them to. I've learned to be okay with being misunderstood, because the people who matter won't need a PowerPoint to value you. They'll just know. They'll just So, no, this story doesn't end with a tearful hug or a shared holiday meal. It ends with me standing on my porch, coffee in hand, morning light filtering through the trees, feeling finally like I belong, not to them, but to myself.